Hey everyone, welcome back to Horse2 Cinema. Today I'm going to be reviewing X, which is a new film from T. West. I actually saw this movie before I saw Morbius, which was my last review, but as if you've seen the review, you can probably tell that I felt a very urgent need to review that movie. And when I went to see X, I went and saw it with a friend of mine, and but our theater was. We got to the second floor of the theater, and it was just absolutely full of Morbius posters. It was a great time. And I know it's a low bar, but I'd have to say I did enjoy X quite a bit more than Morbius. So the premise of X is basically that a group of young filmmakers go to shoot a porno movie at a rural cabin in Texas. But when the owners of the property discover their intentions, violence begins to break out. So when I saw and reviewed Scream 5, I mentioned that one of my favorite things about it was sort of the commentary on, you know, slasher movies and sort of like what you might refer to as like sort of trashy horror movies versus sort of modern horror movies that are very like highbrow. And as much as I love highbrow horror movies, I am also a massive fan of the slasher exploitation genre. And unfortunately, I do think it's kind of hard for slashers to, you know, be really appreciated in the modern day. I think they're viewed almost as like, you know, just an overall bad genre by a large portion of the public. And I don't think that's true at all. So when I heard that X was coming out and I saw the trailer, I was naturally looking forward to, you know, a return to that style of filmmaking. And in most ways, I do think X delivered on that, but I went into the movie wanting to love it, and I came out only liking it, and I'll get into the reasons for that, but first of all, I do want to talk about things that I really liked about the movie. First of all, just when it comes to the overall look of it, I really do like what I saw. In particular, whenever they're shooting these, you know, porn scenes, and they have this like old video camera, those scenes look really of the period. They look really grainy, and yeah, exactly, like they came from 1979. There is a part of me that kind of wished that the whole movie looked like that. And it sort of would make sense given the film's, you know, influences, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which I'll get into. But I do think those scenes shot on the old camera are actually just a really nice contrast to the more modern look of the movie. And I think the contrast does work overall. Because the movie is a modern commentary on the slasher genre in a lot of ways. And so I think it does make sense to approach it with the classic sort of A24 look to things. But also, you know, at times, you know, having a bit more grain and grit in there. I also think the performances are really excellent, particularly Mia Goth, but I think just everyone overall, you know, it's exactly what you want from this kind of movie. A lot of those characters are just slasher archetypes, you know, and they're very simple, but the simplicity is, I think what makes it work, and all the actors, you know, fill those roles very well. As I mentioned, Mia Goth just like really commands your attention whenever she's on screen. I also really like the character of RJ, who I think is like the director of the porn movie, I guess. And he's really funny. He has this like approach of wanting to like transition porn into like, you know, classic filmmaking, essentially. And he also seems to have, you know, a very loose attitude towards, you know, sex, naturally being a porn filmmaker. But the funny thing is when his girlfriend, who is on the trip with them, decides that she wants to star in one of the scenes, and obviously he wouldn't be having sex with her, he gets very defensive about this. He starts to sort of like unravel and reveal his hypocrisy about the whole situation, which I thought was really funny. In the last act of the movie as well, it really goes batshit insane in a way that I think that most slasher movies should. And it was much more, you know, off the walls than, say, the ending of Scream 5, for example, which just kind of felt a little bit more predictable. Now I'll get into my issues with the film, of which there were many, but, you know, overall, again, I did like the movie. I think it's hard to watch a movie like this and not be thinking of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre the whole time. I mean, I think they're incredibly similar. Just occasionally in the look, but also just in the structure of it. You have a group of young people in a van in Texas, rural communities that are suffering economically, and an old white house which has almost the exact same interior structure of the Leatherface's house in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And in a way, with the two old people, you kind of do have Leatherface in a way, because these were not played by actual, you know, very elderly people. I believe the woman is actually played by Mia Goth as well. And the man, I think, is, you know, has quite a few prosthetics on as well. And because of that, their faces are quite leathery in the same way that, you know, Leatherface's mask is. Because of the nature of it being a prosthetic, it basically doesn't look like it's their skin, which is kind of, you know, along the same lines of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And with all of that said, I kind of think that occasionally the Texas Chainsaw Massacre references do feel just a little bit on the nose, just a little bit too easy. But overall, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't my biggest issue with the film, because I think that, you know, there is a pretty clear difference between the two. This is not trying to, you know, copy off of it at all, I wouldn't say. But that sort of transitions to, you know, what was ultimately my biggest issue with the film, which is just its lack of identity. I just really wish it had committed a little bit more to the sort of slasher exploitation genre than it did. I don't think this is fully a slasher movie. I think there is still a lot of highbrow A24 stuff in here. There are a lot of scenes where there's like this really drony, creepy music that's, you know, maybe somebody's like a high singing voice or something like that, that you would be very used to seeing in a movie like Hereditary or The Witch. And then when you compare, you know, this to a movie like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's, if I remember right, there's not much of a score in that at all. They rely a lot on the silence to sort of create the tension. Also, another way in which I don't really think this was, you know, exactly trying to be in the slasher genre, and necessarily the you know, highbrow horror genre either, was just, there are a fair amount of cheap jump scares in this movie. And I don't use that as like, you know, all jump scares are cheap or whatever. I mean in terms of what the jump scare is. It's not always something you should be scared of. Occasionally it's, there's a jump scare, but it's just, you know, a member of the group that just happened to run into them. Which, that's not very A24, and it's also not very Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It kind of fits with some, you know, slasher exploitation movies, but in general, it reminded me a lot more of like horror movies that would come out like in the early 2000s that were just so reliant on, you know, jump scares, especially cheap ones. And even though it does fit with some slasher films that are like that, because the movie doesn't actually seem to, you know, fit into the slasher genre completely, sometimes the horror just feels a little bit muddled for me. But in general, you know, I have my issues with it, but I do think this is, you know, kind of a love letter to two really great aspects of horror, you know, slasher exploitation movies, and also highbrow horror to an extent. I think it understands both of those subgenres really well, but it doesn't really feel rooted enough in either of them to add anything, you know, incredibly unique. So overall, I'm gonna give X 3.5 out of 5 stars. I do, you know, recommend it. I think it's a really fun movie, especially if you like slasher and exploitation movies, and like me, you're kind of, you know, would like to see more of them nowadays. I think you'll really enjoy this, but I don't think it's without its flaws, for sure. Anyway, that's my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, you can of course like it down below, and subscribe if you want. I've got more videos coming out soon, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.